Hi, mystery writers. You are here at Write a Killer Mystery, where we learn to make a good mystery great. And today we're going to talk about how to build story in the middle. We're going to fight that sag in the middle. First, I want to thank my patrons because their support helps keep these videos going, and I just appreciate them so much. And if you would like to support Write a Killer Mystery, you'll find the link in the description below. Okay, the middle is where story happens. A good beginning sets up expectations, and a valid ending resolves the story. And in the beginning, your reader enters the story world, meets your protagonist, and encounters that trigger that sets up the story. And in the end, your protagonist challenges the villain and resolves the story's question, leaving your reader with a sense of satisfaction. But between those two story points, the beginning and the end, lies the great, vast middle. And the middle is where your story happens. It's over 50% of your novel. So you deepen the story by enlarging on the premise at the beginning. The middle expands your story, and you delve into the theme. You create subplots, and you enrich the reader's understanding of the protagonist. And you do this by creating a line of conflicts that put more at stake as the story unfolds. The middle is where you deliver on the story premise you made at the beginning. Have you ever started a novel and it was like, oh yeah, right, and then all of a sudden it's just not holding your interest anymore? That's because the author isn't working on all the parts that go in the middle. It's just for the sake of clarity and explanations. I use the 4-act structure. So there's the beginning, there's Act 2, which goes up to the midpoint, there's Act 3, which follows the midpoint and goes up to the climax of the story. I just want to make that clear. So if I say Act 2, that means after the beginning but before the middle. All right. So today I want to talk about Make It Real. I'm doing this 2 parts. Today is part 1. We're going to focus on Act 2 up to the midpoint. And then the next session we're going to talk about the midpoint and then what happens after the midpoint to get to that climax. So once you set the story in motion, it's time to expand. In Act 2, your protagonist and your reader enter a discovery phase. And this is where you bring that whole world to life, and you want to have all the parts of the world. And it's the time when you want to keep your reader interested in the story, because you have the entire rest of the novel to build your story. So give yourself some space. Create the pacing that focuses on the now of Act 2. So in a mystery, your detective explores the victim's world, and she attempts to make connections between clues and the victim and the suspects. So let's break it down into a few more things. In Act 2, you're going to develop the problem. You're going to explore what started your protagonist, the detective, on the story journey. For mystery writers, your detective now investigates the murder. They may go to the murder scene to discover evidence and clues. They look at the victim's connections to other people and identify possible suspects. And then they interview these suspects and they examine the evidence to determine what can lead them toward discovering the killer. And they're gathering clues from their conversations with the suspects and getting a hint of the personality of each of those suspects. So providing details related to the problem, you emphasize the importance of the problem, and the reader feels the dilemmas the problem presents are important to the protagonist and to the story. Okay, in the beginning, you introduced your protagonist, and now is the time where you can expand your reader's view of the protagonist. They had a first impression in the beginning, and now you get to enlarge on that. You're expanding your reader's knowledge of the protagonist. They saw them in their everyday life, and now you want to show how they think and what actions they take to address the problem. And depending on your protagonist character and all the work you've done in your character development, you're going to show the different ways your protagonist reacts to circumstances, how they respond to challenges, how they respond to opponents who try to lead them away from their goal, how they stay focused on the goal. So, how does your sleuth go about discovering evidence? Do they think rationally or act first and think later? You're expanding your reader's understanding of how the detective works. What does your detective notice? What's their interview style when they meet suspects? You're just giving all this rich detail so your reader feels like their guide in the story, your sleuth, is relatable, is understandable. They're learning more details about their character and how they act. They're learning what their flaws are. They're learning how they react when they meet an obstacle. Do they get angry? Do they just plow on ahead? You're really giving them a lot of details about your sleuth, and also you're bringing in other supporting characters. Who else is in the sleuth's world? They may have a sidekick, they may have a mentor, they may have a love interest, or they may find a love interest in the course of your story. They probably have opposition. They probably have somebody who doesn't like them and just makes life as difficult as possible. So you're introducing all these other people in your protagonist world. Your reader learns your protagonist is human and is three-dimensional, and as you introduce those small conflicts, your reader learns how the protagonist deals with obstruction. And this works as a setup for how the protagonist responds to bigger obstacles and conflict in the next act. But now we're just giving your reader a lot of information. We're just expanding their knowledge of your protagonist. And as you expand your reader's knowledge and vision of the protagonist, you're reassuring the reader that you're delivering what you promised in the book blurb and in the beginning. Yes, they're reading the right genre. Yes, your protagonist embodies the perfect hero for their story. And most importantly, your reader cares. Okay, and also, as I mentioned before, all those supporting characters start coming into play. You bring on the full cast in Act 2. We're once again expanding this story because supporting characters mirror just different aspects of the theme, and different aspects of your protagonist. They enliven the story world with their personalities and showing their different aspects of the protagonist's strengths and weaknesses. So introduce your supporting characters in Act 2. Who lives in the story world? How do they relate to the protagonist? How do they relate to each other? How do they relate to the victim? How do they relate to your protagonist's goal of solving the puzzle? Mystery writers include introducing the suspects, including the villain. We may not know it's the villain yet, but your villain is going to be one of the suspects. So you want to start complicating your hero's life in Act 2. And is there a colleague determined to undermine your hero's goal? Is there a love interest? Are they hesitant, on board, ready to ditch the relationship? You want to set up all these character interactions. Supporting characters help the reader get invested within the story. And as your hero interacts with those characters, you give your reader opportunities to empathize and engage with your hero in the story. Subplots. Subplots deepen your story and expand your story. So what better place to introduce them than in Act 2, which is all about expanding your story. This is where you add dimension to your story with subplots that create mini stories within your mystery. And one of the reasons you want to use subplots is they create added breadth to your story. If you only focused on that one goal, your protagonist finding the killer, the villain, your story can feel flat, especially if you're writing a novel-length story. Act 2 is where you can add these dimensions of subplots. Subplots also humanize your story. In the real world, we don't have just one problem to solve. And so your subplots create various problems for your protagonist, and they add dimension and make them feel much more three-dimensional, and they open up opportunities for your reader to empathize with your character. So internal demons, love interests, opponents are common mystery subplots, adding character depth to your sleuth, who is always on the trail of solving the mystery. Okay, one more thing. In the middle of Act 2, there's going to be a choice. Your protagonist has to make a choice. Some people call this the pinch point. It doesn't matter what the label is. Just want to think about your character making a choice that's going to be difficult but necessary. Usually at this point in the story, in the middle of Act 2, your character means well, and it seems like the best course of action to make this choice, but the consequences send your protagonist on the wrong path. And the choice is often called the first pinch point. It happens somewhere near the middle of Act 2, and this choice pushes your protagonist toward the midpoint. I think one of the things that can happen when we're writing a novel is especially a mystery, because the mystery is going to reveal the killer at the end, is we're so anxious to get to the end. We don't focus on the here and now where your story is. So I think in Act 2 you can train yourself to focus on what's happening now. And for example, with that choice that your protagonist means well and it seems like the right choice of action at the time, but it sets them on the wrong path, it's sending them toward the middle. As far as you're going to go with this choice is the middle. The end is far, far away. So focus on the here and now in Act 2. The main point I want to make about the first part of the middle, the Act 2 in a 4-act structure, is that it expands your story. This is where you bring all the elements in that are going to be in play for the rest of your story. The first part of the middle enlarges the story world. You add dimension to your main characters that interact with other characters and confront obstacles and respond and expose their character traits. You're exposing their character traits by making them interact with other people and interact with obstacles and conflicts. And this is all about showing. And your reader gets to know the character and root for them, because the second part of the middle, you're going to disrupt all those expectations. We're going to talk about this next week. But now is just the expansion. You're setting everything up. You're laying the groundwork for reversals and major conflicts later in the story, and the surprises that escalate the stakes. So next week I'll talk about the second half and how to escalate tension as you work toward the climax. So just to sum up, the first part of the middle, the second act in a 4-act structure, is all about expansion. You're giving your reader more things to chew on. You're giving them a bigger picture of your protagonist. You're giving them a bigger picture of the problem. For mystery writers, that is really entering the victim's world and finding out about the victim and setting up questions about why someone would want to kill that victim. So you're really laying the groundwork here. Okay, I hope that helps. I just think expansion in this part, and keep giving your reader tidbits of information and parts of the story world and characters and subplots. This is all about making your story bigger. Okay. One great way to understand how stories are created is to listen to audiobooks. I find this a lot. I really like listening to audiobooks. As you listen, you start to recognize the different plot points. You really get a sense of where these things happen. Where does that second act choice happen? Where is the midpoint? And one of the things I like about audiobooks is it really trains you to notice these places in the story, because unlike a physical book, let's just use an example here, unlike a physical book where you can kind of see where the middle is, in audiobooks, as you're listening, you don't know where exactly it is. And so it really helps you train your mind to notice where the major turning points in the story are. One of the new features in Audible are free audiobooks. These are books that have been around for a while for the most part, and now with your Audible subscription, you can add those audiobooks to your library. And I've been listening to Ross McDonald. He just has the mystery plot down. He really knows how to do it. I know one of the reader complaints about Ross McDonald is that, well, his stories are always kind of the same, but hey, he's a very popular, well-read novelist because people like that mystery plot structure. So if you're serious about writing mysteries, I highly recommend listening to audiobooks to help you understand how mysteries work. And you can get your free 30-day trial, if you aren't on Audible already, at audibletrial.com. Write a killer mystery. Okay, thanks. Keep writing. Please tell me how you're doing with your mystery. I love to hear how people are doing with writing. We all need to support each other. Writing is hard work. All right, thank you so much, and I'll see you again next time.